This podcast was created to educate listeners on the experiences of diverse individuals. However, all opinions expressed by the host or guests do not reflect the overall standing of Tarleton Radio or Tarleton State University.
Hello everyone and welcome to Making Space, a Diversity Dialogue, and I'm your host Cole. This is a biweekly podcast where together we'll have questions answered about socially sensitive topics while learning how to create lasting relationships with diverse people. Today we are addressing the relationship between the LGBTQ+ community and religion. Specifically, we'll be touching on the intersections and clashes between Christianity and this group. To help me with this discussion is a local faith leader, Reverend Bradley Dyke. He and his family moved to Stephenville in 2017 when Father Bradley was elected as rector or presiding priest over St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Stephenville, Texas. We did do a separate interview this week, so I'll let him tell you a little bit more about how he came to be the priest at Stephenville's St. Luke's Church.
When I was a kid, there was actually an oil boom going on in my hometown. Like it was just expanding explosively. Mm-hmm. We were United Methodists, and we had moved to that town specifically because my dad was in the oil industry. And we went to the First United Methodist Church, but because of the oil boom, there were so many people, like you had to sit in the floor. Kids had to sit in the floor. It was probably against every fire code known to man. And across the street, there was a church that did not look like it was overflowing with people.
Oh, no.
And that was the Episcopal Church. And so that's where we went. And that's where I got baptized in the 4th grade. And I started going to summer camp. That was an Episcopal summer camp. And there I learned about a God who loved me no matter what. In fact, I remember there was a group of us, and we were going from a lake up to where the cabins were. And one of the kids started talking about someone as being gay, and in a very pejorative sense. And I remember the counselor, Shelby, he's now a priest, and he set us all down and said, what if being gay wasn't something that God cared about? What if God loved everyone? And, I lived into that vision and nurtured that within myself to the point that when I was in middle school and the victim of a lot of bullying and all that sort of stuff, I wanted to kill myself, but I had these intense experiences of Jesus appearing to me as almost like a ghost, like could see through him, but could see him, and saying, put that down, as I would grab an X-Acto knife. And so I felt this intense connection to Jesus and to God and to a loving God. And when I went to college, I had this series of profound experiences, including dreams, wherein I would be surrounded by priests, like everyone's wearing like a black shirt and a white collar. And it was like a banquet table, and there were men and women and all different types of people. And I was there, and I felt more at home there than I felt anywhere else.
Wow, that's incredible.
Finally, one day I woke up and I was singing this song from the movie The Color Purple. Maybe God is trying to tell you something. Maybe God is trying to tell you something. And this is funny now. So I left campus because I could not stop singing this out loud. Like I'm singing it an hour, and this is Lubbock, Texas. So,
right.
And so I decided that I'm going to go get lunch and do laundry at my cousin's house. And so I go to a Taco Bell drive-thru, and I want to be clear that I'm between where I have given my order for some beanie burritos and it up, and I am thinking about all of this, and I feel this blow to the back of my head. Now I consider it very ironic because I believe in a nonviolent God, but I felt a blow, like a mother sort of hitting the back of your head
right, like an annoyed, like, come on, get the message.
And basically I heard a voice say, listen to me. And it was at that moment, from that moment on, that I knew I wanted to be a priest.
Wow.
In Oklahoma in the late 90s, the Episcopal Church as a wide group had been growing much more supportive of gay folks, and had affirmed that we were beloved children of God since 1976. But, in terms of us gaining structure and power within the system, that was more limited and had not really happened in Oklahoma. And so even though there were seminaries closer to Oklahoma, I asked to go to seminary in New York City because I needed the experience of seeing other gay folks in leadership.
Right, being in that community.
Yeah.
And then have the intersection.
Right. Like I went to several other seminaries and interviewed, and the seminary in Austin had never had a gay person attend or an openly gay person attend. And in Virginia they had, but they had this deal where professors, if they were bigoted, they could refuse to grade you based on that. And
wow.
it was a proactive measure to try and support gay folks, because what was happening was professors were writing horrible reviews of gay folks. And so they backed it up. So I needed to go to a place that dealt with openly gay folks that were very supportive. So I ended up in New York City for seminary, and after school, I should have gone back to the Diocese of Oklahoma, but they, in a weird sort of part of my life, I interviewed at a church in Oklahoma, and they said, this board, this vestry said, "Oh, it's so great that you're coming here as a gay man." And I'm like, because this was a very waspy country club parish, and it was the only place I was allowed to interview at. And the woman said, because we understand that if you come here, you'll be celibate. And we have two teenagers who identify as gay, and you can teach them to be celibate. Oh. And I'm not going to lie, I was willing at the time to do 2 years of that job if that statement hadn't been made. I was willing to try and not connect with another man or anything like that. But when they said that, my inner Jesus was like, put that knife down.
Yeah, and it's a difference between acceptance and tolerance.
Yes. And so I told the bishop and that church that I would not go there, and I was immediately kicked out of the ordination process. Oh, no. There were 2 women who saved me, who were really willing to go to bat for me. And so I got reinstated as long as I would find another job. And I found a job in the suburban New York City area, lived and worked there at 2 different churches for about 15 years. And in that time, 2 of my best friends had asked me if I was willing to be a donor so that they could have a child. There was a lesbian couple, really good friends. And we celebrated holidays together. They came and would fix me dinner between Christmas Eve services. And and it seemed very natural. And we thought I would be more like an uncle situation, but we did have a child named Sheridan. And eventually we realized I wasn't an uncle. I was a dad. And because I was taking care of her, since I had days off during the week, I was taking care of her 2 days a week. And that bond was just there, and none of us could deny it. And so we kind of became co-parents. And in the meantime, one of those women, Teddy, her mother died. And she was originally from Weatherford and had a nice family place on Lake Weatherford. And she had this yearning to go back home. And so the rest of us really couldn't deny that to her. And so 3 years ago, without a job or any plans, Frank and I loaded up a U-Haul, and he drove the car and I drove the U-Haul, and we made our way from just north of New York City to Plano, Texas, where we moved in with my dad. Now, in this area,
what a long trip.
Yes, it was a very long trip. Thankfully, one of my best friends from seminary lives halfway between those 2 places. So we took a few days off in Lexington, Kentucky, and rode horses and played tourist for a while. But we moved in with my father, put all our stuff in storage, and we waited. And eventually, someone from this diocese told me about a church in Stephenville that was undergoing a transition. And so in late 2017, I interviewed my first interview for that job. And as you can imagine, they were a little concerned about my and Frank's well-being in Stephenville.
Right, definitely. It's not New York at all.
Yes, it's not New York. And, you know, I knew that. And I felt like I had lived in a bubble. And after the 2016 election, I wanted to challenge that and to use my ministry to challenge some of that. I didn't really necessarily think I was going to go into just an exact opposite bubble.
Right. Stephenville is definitely in a bubble that doesn't really explore the outside too much.
Yes.
And diversity, for sure.
Right. And so I heard about this position, I interviewed, and though the process normally takes about 6 months to be hired by a church, in my case, it took more like 9. And it was because they knew and acknowledged that they needed to do the work. And they were I have to give so many props to this diocese because they really made them do the work and not me do the work for them. You know, they invited them to do mock interviews with openly gay clergy before they ever met with me. They talked about their own feelings. They knew that people would leave if I came here. And yet that's where they felt called to move. And so in April of 2017, we moved here and have been serving here for almost 2.5 years. And it's been challenging, amazing, and wonderful and very hard. And
wow, that's an incredible story, definitely. And it's an incredible journey that you've taken to just being here and being in a place that it's not definitely not as welcoming. And what would you say the biggest differences are between having your practice or being a leader here versus being a leader of faith in New York, as well as being openly gay?
Whether I like it or not here, I am having to teach people about what it means to be an ally to the LGBTQ community. I feel like in New York, there was a base group. Maybe some people were not as sensitive as others, and certainly not necessarily willing to take a sacrifice for gay folks, but I felt like there was a basic understanding, a basic acceptance, and even a community very close by that was very supportive and very embracing. And I also had lots of fellow clergy who were gay. And, you know, that's a little rarer here. And so I feel like my role is different in that sense. And it's something I'm willing to take on. It shouldn't necessarily be my responsibility to educate the public about LGBT.
Right.
But I am knowingly making that self-sacrifice and am willing to do so. You know?
There's just a base difference in knowledge and like vocabulary and everything here versus there.
Yeah, you know, like I remember when there would be devastating legal blows or joys to the LGBT community. And I know especially on the blows, in New York, there were a lot of people who would reach out to me to check and see if I was okay. And I don't think there's that level of sensitivity here yet. I'm hopeful that it will be here, but it's not there yet.
Right. Now, going back a little bit, before you came to Stephenville, was it easy becoming a priest and being openly gay? What was the process a lot different? I know you talked about your interviews in seminary, but being ordained, was it a crazy experience? Was it just kind of hushed? How was that like?
All of the above. So in the process for ordination in the Episcopal Church, the first thing that you do is you get psychologically run up and down. You spend 2 days between therapists, psychiatrists, and exploring, like, is this person have the mental fitness to manage this? And so I went through this, had this lovely woman, it was in Arlington, Texas. And she, on the last day, like literally the last question she asked me, she said, "You're going to know what I'm asking you about when I ask this. And however you answer is okay, but I have to ask. Are you okay with all aspects of your sexuality?" And I said, yes. And at the time I had been counseled that I should not be out while I was in the process for ordination, that I should quietly come out after I'm ordained. People were very scared for me. And after that conversation, when I knew that she knew and that she was going to be writing a report to the bishop, I felt like I had to run interference, and I realized deeply within me that I did not want to be closeted in the process, that if I was going to be a priest, then I needed to be completely transparent. And so I made an appointment with the bishop, and he was kind, but he was also very realistic, and he was not ideological, probably more of a political bishop. And he did not want to take risks with me. And so my experience of him was going back and forth. Like, if the people in the room were very supportive of me, then he was supportive. If the people in the room were not very supportive, then he was definitely not supportive.
Very socially based.
Yes. And, you know, interestingly, so after that, for a year, I would spend 1 week in a month with everyone who was in some sort of process for ordination. And there was this guy, he was, 6'3", 4", and big hulking guy, like imposing, like threatening. And he would sit down at dinner every time right by me, and he annoyed the heck out of me. And he was a person who was a Oklahoma City cop. And and he would like to tell off-color stories about the gay beat in Oklahoma City. Stories about things like, well, there were these 3 guys and they were having a threesome, and when I showed up, 3 of them ran out, 2 of them were in pantyhose, and telling very unkind stories about
underhandedly, like jabbing at you, essentially.
Jabbing at me, and doing so in front of the bishop. And, it's interesting to note that in the second year of seminary, I got a letter from Paul, who now identified as Paula.
Oh, wow.
So she was taking all of her own stuff and throwing it
projecting it.
Yes. And I had lots of experiences of that. The worst of which was a horrible thing. In your second year of seminary, you go home to your home diocese, and the seminary has sent reviews of you and your grades and all that sort of stuff, and you have to meet with basically the board of the entire diocese, what's called the standing committee. And so on a Saturday morning in November, we were all greeted. There were 5 of us, and it was like 11 in the morning, and they said, these interviews are going to be so short. They're going to be like 10 minutes each, and then we're all going to go out to lunch. And so I was the second person. Luke Back was the first. It's kind of the golden straight boy.
Yes.
Of course, he was out in 5 minutes. And I go in, and unbeknownst to me, I don't know why, my file had been stripped of any reference to my sexuality. It was
really?
And so all of my essays, autobiographies, sort of stuff, everything had been stripped of being gay. And so when someone asked, well, why did you go to New York? Because it was odd to go that far away. And I said, well, because I'm openly gay, and I needed to know from leaders and professors who are openly gay how to do that. That ignited what was a 2-hour, can I say show. I remember very distinctly this man who my gaydar was pinging on, but clearly not out to himself or to others.
Right.
He stood up and he slammed the desk and the table, and he said, "I'll be damned if I let this faggot get ordained."
Oh, wow.
And the leader of the standing committee, this woman who I'd known for a long time, was very weak. She could not control the meeting. It quickly spun out of control. And I was asked to leave the room. And so everyone's preparing for diocesan convention outside. Like there are all these decorations moving back and forth and processional
Right.
and all that sort of
Supposed
stuff.
to be happy.
And I'm sitting there in front of this door while they're yelling about me. And it went on for 2 hours. After 2 hours, people stream out, making no eye contact, not whatever. The president of the standing committee said that I had been approved, though of course not unanimously,
Yes. Definitely.
that I was going to have to be celibate. And,
Oh, no.
you know, like my life was on the line. What was I going to do? I certainly didn't tell them that I was in a relationship at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, it was a very difficult, traumatizing sort of thing. I do remember that at the end of the meeting, I walked outside and there were 2 members of the committee who were Native American, and they were sitting by the church sign and they were smoking cigarettes, and they offered me one and I took it. And smoking, and they were just like, you know, they used to do this to us too. And
Oh, wow.
feeling of solidarity, of, you know, this intelligence that we as LGBTQ people have, that that the people who hate us or try and put us in boxes really just haven't done their own work, and it's their own crap, and it's not us, and we see it about them in a way that is powerful, and they don't see it about themselves.
Right. It's this clarity, and also this connection with other minority groups that you just see how things can be so wrong at some points.
Yes. And how they're deriving their sense of goodness or a sense of self based on hating another group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. That, I can't imagine going through that experience. It must have been really disheartening knowing that you felt this call and knowing that your faith was there and that it wasn't like, not that the two were separate, but they could be together without clashing.
You know, I certainly had a lot of fear. I also had a very profound sense of righteousness, you know, like I knew this was wrong. And it was good that I was at seminary in New York, and I was working in a parish that was mostly gay men, though few trans folks, that had been forged through the AIDS crisis, and they were very much a strong community. But there was no kind of in between. Like I was either in Oklahoma or I was in this totally accepting, amazing world, and the two could not understand each other. You know, I remember most people at that church just saying, "Tell them to f off."
Oh my goodness.
I mean, like those are the direct words of my priest mentor. But if I did that in our canonical format, you have to then not do anything in the process for 2 years. And so I was damned if I was not going to be ordained by the people who had raised me and taught me about a loving God who loved me if I was gay or not.
Mm-hmm. Now, okay, so going back to you mentioning multiple places or multiple times in your career, people had asked you to be celibate. And of course, there's a big clash between Christian faith, or at least what people speak and use to oppose gay marriage. Like, if they clash a lot. And what do you respond to these people saying that marriage can only be with a man and a woman? It was God's plan. How do you respond to things like that?
You know, I think someone who's deeply entrenched by that is only going to change their mind if their heart is opened. And what I feel in that is the pain of the closed hearts who cannot see that my relationship or your relationship are loving and caring and beautiful, that they're close to that. And I feel that pain. You know, I do remember in that very meeting, someone asked me if I would be willing to be celibate. And I told them this. I said, you know, for one Lent, I gave up speaking. And so I was not entirely quiet for that Lent because I failed at that spiritual discipline.
Mm.
If they're asking me as a gay man to be celibate as a spiritual discipline, that's something I'm willing to engage, but they needed to realize I was going to fail because that's part of the point. And I think, you know, what so many people want to do is with gay folks to just turn off our sexuality when that's an integral part of who we are, and we cannot turn that off. And to do so is at our peril. And so really at this point, I'm not sure I care much about them. I care about my family, and I care about the legal rights for my family to exist, but I'm not going to change them per se, but I will have an open heart to meet them if they ever have an opening in their heart.
Right. So it's just about being open to the experiences of others and just being willing to talk about it, I guess, is really what it comes down to, I guess.
Well, and I understand it this way, you know, sexuality is freaky, you know,
Right.
We all have wild and different sort of inner freaks in ourselves. And one of the ways that gets expressed is through sexuality. And I think a lot of straight folks or folks who haven't done their work emotionally, they don't want to acknowledge that reality, or they want it to hide or to be behind closed doors. And, you know, and we represent a direct threat to that, because we at some level have to be open about, okay, we have a sexuality that is not typical, isn't the majority, and that's okay. And for them to be able to accept us, they would have to accept themselves first.
So it's a reflection of like what they need to talk about and what others like in the public need to talk about is just sexuality in general, just that it needs to be a more open topic so that it doesn't have to be so different.
I think Gene Robinson was the first openly gay bishop in the Episcopal Church. He was elected in 2003. And he was a mentor of mine while I was in seminary and really helped me navigate things. But I distinctly remember the last time I heard him speak to a congregation. It was in Kentucky. And he said, I'm tired of explaining this to you straight people. You need to do your work. And I think just like white folks right now in our current climate need to be doing our work of studying the history and legacy that we have inherited of racism and slavery and white supremacy, straight folks, sorry, you all need to do your own work.
Right, and it's not the job necessarily of people in the LGBTQ community to go out and educate others, even though that's something, like you said, that we bear in some aspect, right, is helping other people understand. But it does get tiring a little bit.
It can be wearying. And, you know, again, I'm willing to take that on in certain places and certain times, but I have to be able to choose it.
Right. Now, you said that bishop was elected in 2003, correct?
Yes.
So it's been a little while now. It's 2020. Do you feel as if the Episcopal Church or even Christianity in general has kind of started to turn more to acceptance, or are we still seeing a lot of just tolerance?
Well, in terms of, I can speak to the Episcopal Church.
Yes.
And, every 3 years, the church, each diocese sends 8 representatives plus a bishop to a meeting that lasts about 12 to 14 days. And I noticed, so that body had to approve Gene Robinson's consecration as a bishop. And it did so, but it did so narrowly. The next General Convention was a completely different reality. Everything that was pro LGBTQ was just passed with a supermajority. And it's been that way ever since. And, sadly, we paid that price in the Diocese of Fort Worth because a majority of congregations left the Episcopal Church over those realities. But the Episcopal Church is standing strong as an ally. And I do believe that. And I feel supported as a gay priest in ways that I never had early on. That said, wider Christianity, what I know about humanity is that when there is division and chaos and people can't get along, that the easiest way to settle that is to have a scapegoat. And LGBTQ folks have been a very convenient scapegoat to especially conservative Christians, and has been kind of red meat to their base. And they love it and can't get enough of it, and makes them feel morally superior. And, that unfortunately has been a strand of Christianity since the beginning. When within a few generations they wanted to blame the Jews, or they wanted, and it's a human reality, and it will always come up in religion. And unfortunately, we have been the victims of that and continue to be in many circles. I'm glad to be in my space of Christianity
Right.
that is not locked up in that fear.
I wanted to address something. I'm sure all of the listeners are kind of wondering about it. It is brought up a lot, is the textual, the biblical texts that discount or oppose homosexuality.
Right.
What do you say to these folks? Like, how do you respond to that? Like Sodom and Gomorrah, for example, or Leviticus is another one that I've seen.
So Sodom and Gomorrah, if you really read the text, is about inhospitality. It is not about homosexuality, which is not even mentioned. It's about inhospitality. And the Old Testament is very clear in moving people toward hospitality, which was a Middle Eastern ancient virtue. That you had a responsibility if someone showed up at your doorstep to take care of them. And the people in Sodom and Gomorrah did not do that. And now, interestingly, there is actual artifactual evidence that Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed by a comet or by a meteorite.
Wow.
So, the story might be just sort of trying to explain that in one way or another anyway, but it was not about man-on-man action. The same could not be said for Leviticus, but the section of Leviticus in which the scripture comes is actually in a section called and referred to by scholars as the Holiness Code. And that is because Leviticus was meant to be a manual about how to be a temple priest. And so these rules applied to temple priests. And why they were mentioned in this context was because, Israel was constantly in this position of they were kind of an underdog, and, they were at the center of all these trade routes. So everyone wanted a piece of Israel, but they found it hard to do that. But so all these other cultures are interacting along these trade routes, and the other cultures, for the most part, what we know about them, practiced temple prostitution, meaning that there were gods of fertility, and the idea was that you would go and you would get laid, and that would promote your chances of actually having your wife get pregnant.
Wow.
And it was a divine sort of transaction. And so what I think Leviticus is about is saying, don't do that. I don't think, I do not think that they are saying that Brad and Frank should have 2 cats and get married and have a kid with a couple of lesbians. I don't think they think about that at all.
Right.
You know, the other thing I would say is there used to be a pamphlet in the Episcopal Church that said on the front, what did Jesus say about homosexuality? And you open it up and it said nothing.
Oh, wow.
You know, Jesus never referred to homosexuality. Now, Paul does, but that's an even more interesting sort of thing, because most people who want to quote Paul as being against homosexuality, they want to do something called text proofing. They want to take like a sentence and they take it out of context and then they use that as a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
If you read Romans as a whole, you see what's happening is, Douglas Campbell is the best scholar on this, but that what Paul is doing is that he's using an ancient oratorical device, meaning that he states the position of his opponent, and then he states his own position. And so Romans 1 through 4 is all very much against gay folks and all that sort of stuff. But in chapter 5, I believe, now I'm Episcopalian, so getting right chapters and verses is never a good thing. But in chapter 5, he says, and you do all the same stuff yourself. And then says, therefore love one another. And so it's like this diatribe against what others had been saying. Mm-hmm. And so to judge each other and to say this person has the grace of God and this person doesn't. But he's saying, you know what, we're all fallen, love one another. Mm-hmm. And, you know, what a wonderful world it would be if we heeded that advice.
Right. It definitely would. So it's interesting. It's almost like when you're in grade school and you're trying to figure out and analyze a text truly, and they make you write those funny book reports and everything, but a lot of people aren't really analyzing the text truly and biblically.
Well, that's fair in a sense. I mean, you know, most Christian traditions that we're talking about right now, mm-hmm. they became their traditions because they rejected the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. Mm-hmm. And that's where they got their start. And it is still in their DNA. And so part of that includes the inability to see a historical, contextual understanding and reading of biblical scriptures. They just want it to all be there and it to be straightforward. It says it right there in the text. And right. Let alone that in the last 100 years, we know so much more about these ancient languages and we know so much more about their lives because of archaeology. Mm-hmm. And that needs to inform our reading of the Bible and our understanding. I mean, that and the fact that, you know, homosexuality was a word that was invented in the
1900s, something like that? Yes.
Like after the Civil War. So to apply it and to translate texts as referring to that is really mistaken. I believe that most of those texts refer to temple prostitution.
Mm. So it's definitely has a lot to do with just the translation differences in our vocabulary now versus back then as well. Now, if someone did want to learn or reevaluate some of these verses and some of these beliefs, how would you suggest that they go about it if the listeners want to see, like, look at things?
I would really recommend Googling James Alison, and it's 1 L in Alison. James Alison on LGBTQ and scripture, I believe. It was a conversation that he had at the Episcopal Seminary of the Southwest in Austin. And he dissects every one of those texts way better and way more thoroughly than I could. And he's funny as hell. And, you know, he really begins with, you know, how we have often used scripture to reflect what we want to see happen rather than what's actually there. And he begins by dissecting something that I didn't know was the most often quoted scripture in written sermons in the 19th century. And it was a scripture from Genesis that was warped and misused to reinforce that Black folks should always be enslaved.
Oh, wow.
And
really?
so, yes. And so, they're still doing some of that with gay folks and with women.
And Indigenous people. And
Absolutely.
now, on a different note, what would you say to LGBTQ people who have had bad experiences in the church? Like, how would you go about talking to them and telling them how to recover from bad things that have happened to them in regards to that?
I guess the first thing I would say is that the answer to bad religion is not no religion. That if you have a connection to the divine or have wanted a connection to the divine, that is possible between you and God. I don't have to be a part of it. And if you would like to be a part of a community, then you should do your homework and make sure that they have taken ally stances and make sure that they've put their money where their mouth is and do the hard work of accepting them, their own selves and you, and be leery. Probably one of our most committed members who is gay and comes from another tradition that is very harmful, kept coming back and sitting in the pews like this, just
arms crossed.
Very, and after every service, he would ask me, why are you doing that? And it was very antagonistic and it was whatever. The guy's in seminary now.
Oh, wow. That's a big change.
He doesn't want to be a priest, but he wants to do good work in the name of God. And I think that there are places for us, for all of us. And, in these divided times, I think we all need connection with one another at a deeper level than many connections go. And church can be one part of that mix, to connect to not only God, but your neighbor. And, the other thing I would say is that try and find a church that's outreach focused, that serves the community. Because if you want a community that could help you, then it's a community interested in helping.
All right. Well, I don't have any more questions for you. Thank you so much for all your responses, and thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to tell the listeners?
Just, Desmond Tutu, who ended apartheid or helped in apartheid in South Africa, whenever he meets anyone, he hugs them and says, I love you. And, same is true, I think, for me and for others, just to say and to know you are loved. And that is beyond my comprehension, but is my experience. And if you are suffering, I feel a deep connection to you. I want to help. And there are plenty of others who do.
I would again like to thank Father Brad for joining us on the show for that interview. He gave really good answers and some really in-depth things to think about. I really enjoyed it. I hope you guys did as well. This is definitely not the end of the conversation with LGBTQ plus people and religion. Hopefully we'll have another part for you guys. If you didn't get your question answered, why don't you just send us a message on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at theplanet100.7. That's also where you can find updates on the show. That is the radio station we are based out of. Be sure to check back for the next episode when I am joined by Dr. Del Carmen, an expert in criminology, as we discuss the law enforcement perspective on racial profiling and the current civil rights climate. Now, until next time, folks, be safe and take care.
This has been a Tarleton Radio Network podcast with production from AJ Heyer and Taylor Welch. Find more great shows by searching Tarleton Radio Network wherever you get your podcasts.